Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battisil, your host and resident provocateur, and I am here with a very special guest today, Michael Levitt, who is near and dear to my heart, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But he is the author of a book, 369 Days, How to Survive a Year of Worst Case Scenarios. And we're going to be talking a lot about his book today, but let me just tell you a little bit about Michael. Michael has a diverse background across a multitude of industries and interests. He is the founder of breakfastleadership.com, where he provides coaching and content to leaders of all industries and walks of life to help them start off their days the right way. I love that. He holds a yellow belt in lean healthcare from the Ontario Hospital Association and is trained in crisis intervention from the Canadian Training Institute. He's been recognized as a healthcare leader working in the primary care sector for over a decade and has the Advanced Healthcare System Leadership Certificate from Rotman School of Management, one of the world's most highly ranked business schools, which is part of the University of Toronto. And he hails from Toronto, but he is actually American, and he is from my hometown, my original hometown of Detroit. And so let me tell you just a little bit before we welcome Michael aboard here. Michael and I actually met about 5 months ago at the New Media Summit, which is an event, a live event for podcasters who are looking for guests to be on their shows and for people who are looking to be on podcasting shows. And it wasn't until the very last day that Michael and I had a chance conversation where I was talking about putting together a virtual summit of content for men. And Michael had presented this phenomenal presentation during his pitch. We all got 2 minutes to pitch our whatever it is that we wanted to share with the podcasters to be guests on their shows. And Michael made this killer presentation, and I knew, I didn't know how I was going to end up doing something with Michael, but I knew instantly he was the guy. And this was out of a room of 200 people, and I just zeroed right in on this guy. And so at the end of the event, I went up to him, introduced myself, and I invited him to be one of the people who was going to be part of this virtual summit for men. He agreed right away, and then shortly after that, we had another conversation where we started talking about the whole issue of trauma and people's responses to trauma. And one thing led to another, and within a couple of weeks, we were sitting together in a Starbucks in Toronto, kicking around some ideas. And fast forward 5 months, Michael and I have started a consulting firm called Preemptive Strike Consulting. We have just finished writing a book together called Preemptive Strike Leadership: How to Neutralize the Behavioral Threats in Your Organization. And we are entering the whole world of corporate consulting, where we are looking at the external stressors and internal emotional issues that employees are facing and bringing with them into the workplace, and how management of organizations is responding very badly to them, which ultimately triggers them, and they end up behaving very badly, and management responds badly to that, and then the whole shit show begins, where the employees who are now disgruntled head off onto the internet and start bashing the company, and all kinds of bad things happen from that point forward. And so 5 months of working together after having not known one another, and we both discovered during the time that we're talking to each other and working out this book together, we're both from Detroit. So there was something very much about Michael and I needing to be brought together in the universe. And with that, I will say, Michael, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you. It's so weird that you and I have been working on this book, and now I'm actually interviewing you. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for that. And I mean, what an incredible introduction. And as you're reading off of that, it reminded me, it's like, wow, I've actually accomplished a couple things in my life. And, I don't, and most people know this when you're going through life and you're doing things and you experience and you gain things and you have some accomplishments and you celebrate them and then you continue on. And then when you go back and you look at all of that, it's like, no wonder I'm tired. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. But no, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be on the show today.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Michael, I want to start with, as I referenced in the introduction, can you talk to me a little bit about what breakfastleadership.com is?
I launched Breakfast Leadership a little over 3 years ago now, although the framework for it and some of the work that formed that organization I started several years ago. And the reason why I came up with the name is because we work with CEOs and executives and senior leaders, and I found the only time that you can actually get their attention is first thing in the morning before they get into the trenches, their office, their work mode, because once they're in there, it's very difficult to get access to them.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. One, they may just be involved in deep work and it's difficult to get time with them. And also, too, because of all of the responsibilities that they have, whether they've been self-imposed or directives from their board or other management, again, they're very hard to approach and reach. So the breakfast leadership side of things originally was launched as I wanted to meet with these types of organizations and senior leaders first thing in the morning over breakfast, whether it was at a meetup or some type of an event, done by 9:30 so they can get into the office and do what they needed to do. And then after that, starting to work through all of that, and noticing what was going on in the world. And I talk about this a bit. We have an epidemic. We have an epidemic with senior leaders and executives rapidly approaching burnout. And it scares the hell out of me because these are the leaders of our organizations all across the globe. And if they burn out and they have what happened to me or worse, then all of a sudden that organization has lost a leader. Their family has lost a loved one.
Right.
Society has lost a great leader. And all of these things can be preventable. So I decided, all right, I need to shift gears a little bit and start really creating content and sharing content of all of these challenges that I'm seeing all across the globe and across every sector. My background over the last decade or so has been in the healthcare space, but burnout is not afraid to approach people in education, the legal field, manufacturing, everybody. And even millennials are burning out, and children are burning out, which is just absolutely alarming. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but that's the premise of the organization, and why I launched it was because I don't want to see anybody go through burnout, because I know what it does. I know the challenges it creates, and with my own personal story and everything else that I've seen, and how it can really cause some significant trauma for that individual, their family, their coworkers, everyone involved.
Right. Well, you know what? Let's explore this whole issue of burnout for a bit before we talk about your book and, just the events that change the trajectory of your own life. And when you're talking about burnout, are you talking about it just in the context of people working as much as they are today?
That's a big part of it. I've had discussions with other leaders, and one of the things that seems to be a common thread throughout of it is if we go back 10 years to 2008 when we had the economic recession, and organizations were either closing or significantly downsizing, not just on the front lines, but in senior management levels as well. So fast forward 10 years, the economy seems to be doing okay. Depending on what sector, there might be some retail, of course, is taking it, pretty hard because there's an adjustment on how consumers are purchasing things.
Right.
But other industries, including the auto sector, seem to be doing quite well. But the challenge is those organizations did not go back and rehire people to fill those roles
Right.
that were eliminated 10 years ago. Those roles remain empty, and there's no indication that they're going to be replaced. So
Right.
leaders that have been used to working and doing the jobs of maybe 2 or 3 people like they have for the last decade will continue. And even a conversation I had with Scott Eblin from the Eblin Group, and he's got the book The Next Level. He said in his research, in the last 18 months, CEOs are saying that their workloads are more than they were. And that's just in the last 18 months.
Right.
So we have a significant challenge ahead because these executives are putting in some absolutely long days. They're missing out on their family. Their kids are growing up. They're not seeing their kids grow up because they're in the office working so hard. And it's taking a toll on them because, again, there's all kinds of different things that add into it, including bad dietary choices. They're not sleeping well, for one thing, because they're working so hard. They get home, they basically pass out, but it's not restful sleep.
Right.
So they're not getting a full night of sleep to rebuild what's been damaged throughout the day. So that starts building up over time, and eventually you'll start seeing either significant weight gain or potentially significant weight loss, stress, irritability, mistakes, marital problems, you name it. The sky's the limit. And when you're in a burnout state, oftentimes you don't recognize it. And what happens in that situation is your colleagues and friends definitely notice something's off, but you're so busy in your work and being so focused on things that you actually are not paying attention and not taking care of yourself first. And when you don't do that, the cause and effect of that can be pretty traumatic.
And what is it that's motivating these people to work in the way that they are? I mean, they're in true positions of leadership and power, and they have the control, the power, the decision-making ability to do pretty much anything in their organizations. But what is driving them to be working like this? Sure, there's the argument that there are fewer and fewer people available to delegate things to because of what happened 10 years ago and the elimination of this entire layer of management, in which I was one of those people who was, as you have referred to in our book, dehired. That, now people are, ending up having to do a lot more work, but the technology available to us is significantly greater than it was before, which allows us to be much more efficient. And I know it also means that now people are working 24/7. They're in the bathrooms, checking their emails at 3:00 in the morning. And so it is this way of working that has become a way of life for people, which is contributing to the burnout. But what I'm unclear about is what is motivating them to work in this way where it's almost like there's no thought being given to, okay, do I really need to be doing this? I mean, are they actually being any more productive than they were 10 years ago?
I would say no, because the workload and the work that we do, if you work more than, let's say, 6 or 7 hours in a day, the quality of your work is going to drop. And now there's always the anomalies, but for the most part, 6 or 7 hours of deep work is about the max that we can get, because we're not machines. We need to heal our brains and our bodies and everything else. I think there's a few reasons from my research. Some things are, for example, a lot of leaders rose through the ranks and they became the CEO. They've reached their dream. They finally are at the top of the organization that they've worked for a long time, or at least in the sector. They may have left one company to go to another company, and now they're the CEO. So they are now numero uno in the organization. But the problem with many leaders is they never were properly trained on how to lead. They were doers, constantly doing, and being productive and creating things. And when you're in organizations at lower levels, that's what you're supposed to be doing. That's your job.
Right.
But when you are an executive, your role is to direct. to navigate, to be the strategic planning officer. You are the ones that are supposed to be looking out at the external and internal world and figure out, okay, where's our organization at right now? Where should we be going? What should we be doing? What should we be focusing on? What are some risks that we could be facing? What's the climate out there? What's our stock doing? All of these things. But instead, they're trying to do that, but then they're also, some of them micromanage, or some of them really suck at delegating.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely one of those people. So they're trying to do two things. It's almost as if they're a split personality. So
Right.
they're not accomplishing a lot by working those extra hours. Actually, the quality of work is going to drop off.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason I think that comes into play is self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things too where I see this with some executives, and they're very, 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 very shy when it comes to publicly talking about some of this, because they're the executive, they're the leader. They have all kinds of eyeballs on them. Everybody in the organization knows who the boss is, and they misstep or sneeze funny or something like that, someone's going to comment about it. And of course, in this day of social media and instant everything, any misstep by an executive
Mm-hmm.
is going to be on Instagram or Twitter within 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing you know, they've got a shitstorm to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're living on this, I have to be completely and 100% perfect. And none of us are. So they're trying to be somebody that, quite frankly, they can't be. It's just not possible. They should be themselves, and recognize and have the confidence knowing you're a CEO for a reason, because you're good enough to lead an organization. So lead it. And
Right.
they sometimes forget that.
Right. And then what is going on for them emotionally as it pertains to all of the personal relationships they have and the personal responsibilities they have? Because this way of working takes a huge toll on marriages and relationships with children. Now, knowing that that's the case, and they are experiencing often conflicts in the home around this, why is it that they are still traveling the path of burnout versus stepping back and saying, wait a minute, I need to check myself in what I'm doing, because look at the price that my family is paying, and by extension, I'm paying. Why are they still working the way that they're working?
I think pride comes into it, and also one of the things that we talk about quite a bit in our new book is, much like the employees, executives are bringing baggage in too. So if they're having marital problems, or if their children are upset with them because they missed another soccer game or recital or whatnot, they're bringing that into work. And then if something happens where the stock tanks one day, or maybe the sales for second quarter are off by a lot more than was projected, or their key salesperson left for competition, or you name it, all of these things that come up every day, it takes on more weight. And then they go, all right, I need to fix this. I need to put my nose to the grind, and let's try to correct this. And instead of pausing and reflecting and looking at, okay, where are we right now? There's this desire to just dive in. And it's very difficult for many leaders, again, to approach, their board or their, bosses and say, I'm having some issues at home. That's not something that, unfortunately, exists in many organizations. There's the communication component of it, is having the leaders feel comfortable talking with their leader, saying, there's these issues at home, I'm dealing with them accordingly, but there may be some times that I need to do this or do this. And even with the extra hours, I think there's this perception that they have to do it. Now, every boss that I've ever had in my career, I've never had any of them say, we expect you to work 17-hour days.
Right.
They've never said that.
Funny how that works.
That's never been mentioned. It's never been on a piece of paper. Now, there has been, of course, situations where, okay, we may need you to work a little extra tonight so we can get this particular project done. I worked in IT for a while, so a lot of updates and deployments, of course, we try to do after hours to minimize interruption to the business. That's just a given. We know that's the case. So you adjust accordingly, and all right, yeah, I'm going to have to put in a longer day today.
Right.
Okay, so be it. But those 16, 17-hour days were never implied upon. But in some instances, in some organizations, executives and managers and employees feel they have to work those extra hours because for some reason their boss or their team are constantly communicating with them at all hours of the day. You mentioned this, the cell phone, the smartphone, checking emails.
Yeah.
I back, 10 years ago, I was checking emails from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week because I was getting emails at all of those times. And I created my own monster in that situation because I was replying to them.
Yeah.
Now I don't. Nights and weekends, I don't reply to emails unless I'm working on a certain project or, I don't know, maybe writing a book or something like that. Then, I'm going to do it because, again, I know it's a season where I can do it. I've got the capacity to do it. It's not a huge interruption for me to do it. But for normal day-to-day operations, I set a boundary on when I'm going to be accessible and when I'm not.
And you know what? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
No, I'll use this analogy. My dad worked for General Motors. He worked at the assembly plant in Pontiac, Michigan. And well, yes, he brought home stress because during the time that he worked there, there was always that chance that he was going to get laid off, like many of his colleagues did. But the thing of it is, he didn't bring his work home with him. He worked on the line, so I don't recall ever seeing a forklift in our driveway, with a bunch of engine blocks that he's delivering, to Plant 8 and. Or he worked at Plant 5 and Plant 8 for anybody from Pontiac or worked at GM Pontiac. You'll know what I'm talking about. So he didn't bring any work home because his work was to be conducted at work. Somehow, some way, we need to reestablish that boundary in our lives. So when we're at work, we're at work. Do the work, deep work, do the stuff that only we can do. Have other people do the stuff that only they can do. And then collectively, you're going to be doing a lot better job for the organization and yourself.
Right. And this brings me to a word that you've said a number of times thus far in our conversation, and that is boundaries. And why is it that people who are suffering from burnout have such a hard time creating boundaries for themselves around how they're working?
I think it's this lack of putting yourself first. And some people may look at that as being selfish. Yeah, it's called self-preservation. You want to preserve yourself. You need to take care of yourself first. You cannot serve from an empty glass. And many of us that have burned out or are on the highway to burnout are trying to serve from a very empty glass. We're not taking care of ourselves. We're not eating properly. We're not getting enough rest. We're not spending enough time just being and doing things and taking vacations and putting the iBinky down, as my brother calls my phone. And because, again, we have this technology, which is absolutely awesome. We can do pretty much everything on these things. However, we don't shut down. The average number of times people pick up their cell phones is anywhere between 80 and 150 times a day. That works out in a 16-hour day of being alert. If you sleep 8 hours, which most of us don't, you're picking the thing up at least every 5 minutes, if not more than that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of activity. And it's a case where we don't have the boundaries on that, which then just starts leading into other things. We see the red lights of the notifications on all the apps that we have, and we have to go, I have to get rid of that red light. It drives me crazy. I have to deal with it. It's like the voicemail light on the phone, or for those of us that remember BlackBerry, the little blinky red light on our BlackBerry rim pagers. We had to deal with that. Who messaged us? Who called us? So we've been conditioned to have to play whack-a-mole basically and just get rid of those moles. And it takes a toll. And if we don't take care of ourselves and protect ourselves first, then we're not really serving anybody with the best version of us. We're shortchanging everybody. Right. So that's boundaries is a difficult thing for people to implement because, one, they don't want to hurt people's feelings and they're afraid of repercussions, but they're shortchanging themselves and actually causing themselves harm by not having boundaries in their life.
And Michael, do you think it's the case that the only way that people who have difficulty with boundaries around their work and who are in fact suffering burnout, whether or not they acknowledge it or not, whether or not they're even aware of it, that the only way change takes place for them is for some fairly catastrophic thing to happen, like a health crisis?
It can be a health crisis. It could be a financial crisis. It could be a home crisis. It could be a variety of things. Something triggers them, and they get to the point when, I know Tony Robbins likes to say this a lot, the pain to stay the same has to be more painful than the pain to change. And I'm paraphrasing that a bit, but basically people tend to avoid changes. But if the pain to stay where you are right now isn't as big in your mind as changing, then you're not going to make those changes. And but a health scare, definitely can trigger momentum to make some adjustments in your life, hopefully. Right. But as I found out, in my story, with people that have gone through similar health issues, only 10% actually make the necessary changes.
Right. I've read that before. It's shocking.
Which means 90% go, well, okay, I survived that. I guess I'm good. And, got a jail-free card. Congratulations. I can continue the way I was living and no problems. Yeah. And that's not the way to go about it.
Right, for sure. And, you just alluded to your own story, and let me ask you, somebody who writes a book, 369 Days, How to Survive a Year of Worst Case Scenarios, and who has something called The Breakfast Leadership and is all about, burnout and boundaries. I have to assume that means you've experienced all of this in your own personal life. Is that correct?
You are very correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Michael. So tell me the story behind 369 Days, How to Survive a Year of Worst Case Scenarios.
Back in 2007, I applied for an executive director role for a startup medical clinic just outside of Windsor, Ontario. I'd lived in Windsor for a few years, actually immigrated to Canada in 2004, became a Canadian citizen in 2011, which I'll say this, which means I can vote and screw up 2 countries instead of just one. And that's where I'm going to stop because I don't want to isolate anybody. But I can screw up 2 countries, which is actually pretty powerful. But going back to the story, I applied for this executive director role for a healthcare clinic because it was literally 5 minutes from where I was living. And at that time, I was still working in Detroit and crossing the border every day, which is fun and games, to say the least. But after going through several rounds of interviews, there was 85 people that applied for the role, and I was one of the final 3 for I was third round of interviews at that point. And then he hired me. And I was there a year before I found out why, because I was the only person that interviewed that had 0 healthcare experience. I never ran a healthcare organization before. I had no idea what an autoclave was, but I was tasked with opening up a brand new clinic that was under construction, recruiting physicians, hiring all medical staff, and then educating the community why our clinic was better than the two other clinics in town, and what the purpose of it was, and why we were doing what we were doing. So it was definitely both feet, hands, legs, toes, everything into the fire.
Right.
And I was grinding, and as I alluded to before, checking emails from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day because I was getting them. And there was just a lot going on because it was a startup. And anybody that's ever been in a startup, and most entrepreneurs know exactly what that is because their business was a startup. And so lots of work, lots of educating, hiring, recruiting physicians, navigating all of these different things, working with our government funders for additional funding for the expansion and actual moving to a permanent location instead of the space that we were in a retirement home. All of those things, took place between 2007 until May of 2009. Fast forward to May 2009, it was a Monday, and I was mowing my front lawn, and I had an electric mower because our lawn wasn't that big in the front. So I thought, you know what, I'll just use an electric mower instead of gas. That way I don't have to screw around with getting gas all the time and keeping in the shed. And I had little kids, and, not that I was expecting them to do anything, but it's like, let's just be safe. So it was not an easy mower to use because it was a little bulky, but I turned a corner and I had this sharp pain in my chest. And I went, wow, I pulled a muscle big time there. And I felt that pain for the next few days anytime that I lifted anything up with my right arm. And was like, wow, I really pulled it. And then Thursday night, went out to dinner at a local restaurant, and they had a special thing where it was like this huge deal. So all kinds of food and all that. So I ate way too much. So around 10 o'clock that night, I had the worst chest pain I've ever had in my life. And I blamed it on just overeating so much rich, fatty, fried goodness. And I'm like, oh, so I fell asleep. And then I got up in the morning, and that pain that I had when I lifted anything up with my right arm was persistent. So when I got into the office, I talked to the physician that was there, and I said, okay. So I've been having this discomfort all week, and I explained to him the situation. And I said, now today it's just prevalent all the time. So he, listened to my chest, and he says, all right, just to be safe, it's probably nothing, but why don't we run a quick EKG on you and see what's going on? So we had EKG equipment because we were in a rural part of the community, and it was about a half an hour to the hospital. So we decided it'd be a good idea to have a EKG unit in the clinic, which is ironic that the equipment that I purchased was being used on me. So I had to go into the procedure room we have. And at this point, I'm not worried about, what's going on with my chest or pain or all that. I'm more concerned that I'm taking my clothes off in front of my coworkers. And I'm embarrassed by this. I'm like, this is not fun. So literally I'm, laying down, the nurse is laughing, everybody's having a good time joking about it and making harassment jokes and all this stuff. And they're saying, we're keeping our clothes on. I'm like, well, that's not fair. But, but anyway, they proceed to hook me up, and they ran the test, and they looked at it, and they were perplexed. And they said, you know what, maybe, we haven't used it a lot. Maybe there's something goofy with it. So they ran the calibration on the equipment. Everything checked out fine. So they rehooked me up again with all the electrodes and everything, ran the test, got the same results. So they said, we're going to send this over to the cardiologist at Hotel de Grace Hospital in Windsor. So they did. And Dr. Gina, the cardiologist over there, called back after reviewing the results. And then the doctor at the clinic said, okay, this is exactly what Dr. Gina said to me. Tell Michael to get his ass to the hospital right now, and he cannot drive. That was a fun phone call home. Hi, honey. I need to go to the hospital, and you need to take me. And can you have your sister come pick up my car, please? That kicked off, and I was there for a week. I had a pretty significant heart attack. I had 2 blockages in my left anterior descending artery, which is known as the widowmaker, because usually when people have a severe heart attack with blockages in that artery, they don't survive.
Right.
So I'm still here. You've seen me. You physically
yes,
touched
I
me.
have.
You know I'm here.
Yep.
I'm not talking to you from the other world, and no, I don't know what the lottery numbers will be Friday, so quit asking. So I had the heart attack, and have 2 stents in the artery, and then was off of work for 17 weeks.
Wow.
And during those 17 weeks, I did obviously a ton of soul searching, and also learned how to relax again, because up to that point, I wasn't relaxing because I was just going at it 24/7 and not resting and not eating properly and not taking care of myself, and burning out, having no boundaries at all. And it took a toll, and it nearly cost me my life. So thankfully I had, through work, short-term disability coverage, which the employers at the time weren't overly pleased that we had that, because that's hella expensive insurance, and most organizations don't have that anymore because it's so expensive. Mm-hmm. But thankfully we did, because we had room in our budget to do it, and I'm all about providing the best benefits possible for employees, because it's, if you can't pay them as much as they deserve, make up for it in other ways. So fast forward 17 weeks, get the clearance from Dr. Gina that I can return to work. So return to a job that I no longer had. They let me go. They decided they wanted to go in a different direction. So they gave me a nice little severance, which was nice. But that severance only goes so far when you're spending close to $1,000 a month on all these new medications that you get to take now that you've had a heart attack. So, and also, when you get a severance and you go on unemployment, you don't get your full paycheck. And with severance, the tax man definitely cometh then, because they usually take a gigantic chunk out of it. Right. So it didn't last as long as it needed to. And if you recall, this was in 2009. The economic recession was in 2008.
Yeah.
So, in being a sister city of Detroit, there wasn't any jobs of my caliber around. There wasn't any jobs anyway. The people that had jobs, they were pouring cement on their shoes because they weren't going anywhere. They were staying put because it was just, there was nothing available. So here I am, 17 weeks, had a heart attack, and now I don't have a job in a horrible economic situation. So I spent the next few months going on interviews, and as I talk about in the book, kind of feel like the Buffalo Bills when they were going to all those Super Bowls and they never won one.
It kind of sounds like the Detroit Lions, who just never even made it to the Super Bowl.
Well, now that the Chicago Cubs have actually won a World Series, Lions, you're up on the clock. Yeah, let's see if we can, get rid of this curse too, and then we'll, hell didn't freeze over when the Cubs won, so we'll see. The Lions might be a true test. We'll find out. Yeah, they're 0-2, and they're facing a very upset New England Patriots team next Sunday, or Monday. I don't remember when the game is. So it's going to be problematic. The Lions might be 0-3, or excuse me, the Lions will be 0-3. Prediction, take it to ProLine or whatever. Because I'd go on all these interviews and I'd come up in second place. So I'm beginning at this point. I'm going, okay, what's going to happen here? What's going on? And I was looking all throughout, Southwest Ontario, Kitchener, Waterloo, London, Windsor, obviously. I even looked in Detroit, started sniffing around Chicago because I had lived in Chicago for 6 years, looking around there, and it was just nothing was around. There was just nothing available. And so finally, after, several months, I decided, okay, I don't want to work in Toronto, but I may not have a choice. So I decided, okay, I'll start applying for roles in Toronto. And sure enough, 2 weeks into it, I had 4 interviews, and I had 2 job offers within 3 weeks. So,
wow.
so here we are, heart attack, job loss, unemployed for several months. Finally get a job in Toronto, which is 4 hours away from Detroit. So have to uproot the family and move to, from a community, general area that has about a couple 100,000 people to Toronto, which, has the greater Toronto area has around 7 million people.
Right.
Slight difference. And so it was, that was pretty traumatic to have to move away from family and all of that. But, I got the job. Then the next thing that happened, I was in the new role for about 6 weeks, and I was having a meeting with one of the directors in the organization I was part of, and then I received a phone call from my oldest daughter at the time, and she would have been 11 or almost 11 at that point, and she was crying, and I couldn't understand a thing she was saying. And then finally, I was able to gather that the family vehicle had been repossessed. Now, of all the losses that I had, that was the one that touched me the most because I was so far away from home. There was nothing I could do. Right. So lost the family vehicle, and I'm sure that was a traumatic thing to watch a tow truck tow away, the family car. And I know that many people have had that happen to them, and it's not a pleasant experience at all. So after that, it was, up in Toronto, and I was staying in a place, and during, nights and weekends, I was looking for a place for the family to move up to, and finally found a place in the east end of the city. So we moved at the end of May of 2010. So, basically a year after the heart attack. So moving, and I've said this to many people, if you gave me a choice, it said, okay, you get to move, or you get to have another heart attack. I'm strongly considering the heart attack. I hate moving. It is the worst. We had movers. I just hate it.
Yeah,
it's
it
horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I hate moving. Hate it. I don't shake when I see a U-Haul truck anymore, but I still grimace at it and go, kind of like a dog that growls. It's like I look at those things, I just, no. So we move, we get everything up here, start unpacking, and then we realize that we forgot the bunk bed ladder for our girls' bunk bed. Now, I was going back down to the Detroit area in a couple weeks. Actually, no, it was about a week and a half now I think about it. Anyway, I was going back to visit my brother in Michigan for a little bit, and I said, well, I'll swing by the house, and I'll pick up the ladder and make sure we didn't lose anything else there, because we were getting ready to have it listed on the market to try to sell it. Again, there wasn't a lot of things moving even in 2010 at that point.
Right.
But we had the house pretty much ready to go, and it was in move-in condition, so there wouldn't be a lot of work that needed to be done. So I went and visited my brother, and then drove by the house and said, well, let me go in and get the ladder and see if there's anything else we forgot. And I opened up the front screen door, and I saw the largest padlock I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, no.
And there was a note on the door, and it said foreclosure. We didn't get any notifications from the bank that this was going to happen. And they had our address. They knew where we were. And nothing came in the mail. And there was nothing in the mailbox that we had, because they had actually taken the mailbox off of the side of the house. So there was no place to do that. So I looked at the lock, I read the note, and this surprises people when I say this, but at that moment, I felt the greatest amount of peace that I've ever felt in my life. Because I knew that everything was done.
Yeah.
That was it. I had survived everything that just happened over the last year. And I was standing there, had the heart attack. My health was decent at that point. Okay. Lost my job, had a job, family vehicle was repossessed. We had another vehicle that was paid for, so we weren't completely out of a vehicle. House was foreclosed. We were renting a house in Toronto, and we didn't have to deal with open houses and realtors and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I closed the screen door, paused for a minute, and during that peaceful moment, it was just you could hear the breeze in the air and the trees and the birds, and not to go all Zen like, but it was very it was very peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said a really quick prayer over the house. I could say, whoever gets this house, I hope it serves them as well as it did me.
Mm-hmm.
And I got back in the vehicle and backed out and started driving back to Toronto, called up to the house in Toronto and said, yeah, about that bunk bed ladder. Thankfully, our middle child is a monkey. So she gets top bunk. I know they were lobbying who gets top bunk. She's the monkey. She gets the top bunk because she's going to have to be a monkey to go to bed every night.
Right.
So that's what happened. Now, all of those things happened because I didn't have boundaries in my life.
Right.
I didn't say no to the things I needed to say no to. And I said yes to way too many things.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a toll on my life. And
right.
as I alluded to before, with the people that have had heart attacks, only 10% actually make any changes in their lives. I realized that I had an opportunity to prevent that from ever happening again. So it was like, do I want to go through this again? No. Okay, then I need to reinvent myself, and I did. Anybody that's known me for any length of time knows that I am, a much happier, more at ease type of person than I was before, consistently. Right. I mean, I'd have moments of, being, cool, calm, and collected, but there were also moments where I was very irritable and grumpy and, just full of angst and anger and bitter and all of these things and not eating well, and all these things added up. Mm-hmm. So I've changed everything. And now my life is absolutely awesome. I get to go to conferences and write books with PhDs and do all these fun things and talk with leaders and help people learn how to put boundaries in their own lives, to save their lives, to give them the ideal life that they want, because you know what? We all deserve it.
Right.
There's no one needs to go through hating their job and going through all of the angst and struggles and all of that. We have to deal with that bullshit. No.
Right.
You are in control of your life. You have to have that confidence knowing you can find another job. And right now, I mean, it's definitely an employee's market. You have, your pick of what you want to do. And there's so many opportunities with the online space or anything you'd like to do or learn how to do. You can learn how to do anything you'd want. There's online courses. You can read. You can do all of these things. So we are in an absolutely magical time when it comes to being able to do the things that we want to do, when we want to do them, and where we want to do them. And that is what true freedom is. Yes, the money's a great thing. Okay, it's a great tool to be able to do the things you want to do. But when you have the freedom to do what you want, where you want, and when you want, that's what people want.
Right.
That's what they long for. And once they have that opportunity, it just changes everything.
Right. And let me ask you something about the money, Michael. What is your relationship to money today, having gone through losing everything?
I used to say that I wanted to be a minimalist, but then I read Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, and I would definitely identify with being an essentialist. Have the things in your life that you need to have in your life to allow you to do the things that you want to do. I used to collect baseball cards and comic books and trinkets and would just have tons and tons of stuff. And, now, other than, furnishings that you have in a home and all of that, my, quote unquote knickknacks and personal belongings would fit in 2 Rubbermaid totes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I've unloaded so much because I don't need it. It doesn't serve me.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does too for people, and I know a lot of people, like having those things. And there's, again, it's whatever you want in life, that's your life, you do whatever you want. But when you have all that extra stuff, then you need a bigger house, which means you're
Mm-hmm.
paying more utilities, you're buying a bigger house, you're paying more of a mortgage or more of rent, and you're serving that stuff that is just it's sitting in a box.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, getting back to just the things that are essential to me and donating the rest of it or
Yeah.
recycling, whatever the
Mm-hmm.
case may be, has created so much freedom and reduced so much stress in my life,
Mm-hmm.
that it just it makes life easier for me. And so
Yeah.
anything that I look at, it's like, oh, that'd be neat to have. And I'm like, okay, would it serve me?
Mm-hmm.
Would it fit in the place? Would I use it? Is it just something of like, oh, that'd be neat? I'm like, or would it be better for me to just say, you know what? I'll have somebody else make that for me, or I'll just buy it in a different format. But for me, when you lose everything, you don't necessarily want it all back. I know some people
Right.
might, but for
Right.
me, I didn't. It it was good to purge, and it was good
Mm-hmm.
to it was a good experience to actually start off with a clean slate and say, okay, putting things back in that actually makes sense, that serve me so I can serve others. And that's what I have in my life.
Right. And it's really amazing how freeing it is when you say no to all those things. And, the padlock on the house is such a perfect metaphor for, like you said, this was the end of it. And everything was locked away behind that padlock. And now you were truly free because you were no longer being held hostage, economically or financially to your situation or to your job. And once you lose everything, you move forward in your life in a way where you know that you're not going to go down that path again, because who would ever want to go through that experience? And so you really do move into a place where you have true freedom, and where you've come to now, where 10 years later, you're in a situation where you've got a great job, you've got a consulting business, everybody in your family as well, you've got a place that you live. It all comes around, but it's almost like you got to define the terms for what it was going to be this time around. And you being one of the 10% of the people that survived that particular type of heart attack and make changes in your life is really, really extraordinary. And the thing that I'm really curious about, Michael, is what was going on for you emotionally throughout this entire process, and how did you manage to keep yourself going and not just cave in under the pressure and despair that always comes from a situation like you were in?
I'm going to blame my background in being from Detroit. I think that plays a bigger part than I originally gave it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
You know this, and people that are
Mm-hmm.
listening from Motown or have been from Motown
Yeah.
understands that we come from an area that got knocked on its ass pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long, long time for it to bounce back. There's still parts of the city that haven't, but there are parts of the city. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I was walking down Woodward Avenue to the downtown core, closer to where Comerica Park and all that stuff. So I'm walking down Woodward, and it's all built up with new condos and restaurants and all this stuff. And I remember not that long ago, that's not an area that you would definitely want to just take a stroll. It
Yeah.
wasn't the
Dangerous.
safest
Mm-hmm.
area. And you basically, if you were driving it, you drove with your doors locked. If you stopped at a light, you probably ran it. You looked to make sure it was clear, and you wouldn't spend any time there because there was a lot of bad things going on in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
That it's changed, it's cleaned up, and it's kind of screwed with my mind a little bit when I'm walking there going, this is how it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things where I took it in and I felt it, and obviously it looks different than it did back in the
Right.
50s and the 40s, but it was still, there was like this vibe about it. And
Mm-hmm.
Detroiters bounce back. We get knocked down, Joe Louis, you get knocked down, you get back up. And
Yep.
I don't know if I shared this with you or not, but I've got basically a 3D printout of Joe Louis's fist, the statue that's downtown.
I know it well.
I have a 3D statue of that on my desk at the office.
Wow, that's
and
beautiful.
it's a visual reminder to me of, if I'm having a rough day or something's going on, I look at that and I go, okay, it's kind of my, not to go all Bruce Langford on you, but just kind of get mindful on, we love Bruce. Love you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just get mindful on, where I'm at and get back to center and go from it. During those 369 days, I think a big part of it, again, was my background, just get back up. But also I was like in the focus of, okay, this has happened to me. What do I need to do right now to recover, to grow, to get back to what I need to do? What do I need to focus on right now?
Right.
Those first 17 weeks, it's like, focus on your health.
Mm-hmm.
And focus on getting better and healthy and having the energy back. Because for the first, I'd say 5 or 6 weeks, I'd be fine. And then all of a sudden at 2:00, I had to take a nap, period, end of story. I did not have any, I had to go to sleep. And I'm thinking to myself, is this what my life is going to look like from now on? Because I was 40 years old when this happened. 40-year-olds aren't supposed to have heart attacks.
Right.
Just a pro tip for people. So I got a lot of tension in the cardiac ward because I was definitely the youngest guy by probably 30 years. So nurses loved me, but I didn't give them much grief. So, they'd pop in and see how I was doing, but they were attending to all these 70 and 80 and 90-year-olds that were there too.
Mm-hmm.
So going through those things, I just focused on, okay, what's next? All right, I need to find a job. So that was my full-time job, was to try to find a job, and going on interviews and staying overnight in Kitchener, Waterloo, or London or something like that, and going on interviews and coming up second all the time and all of those things. And so, and again, remember, I was working off of a severance, so you're spending money on hotel rooms instead of food or bills and whatnot. And so even with all of those things, I'm not going to lie and say there wasn't bad days. There were, but I realized again, that, okay, I had a pretty significant heart attack that should have killed me, but it didn't. So keep that in mind. There's a positive. Okay, now what do we do? What's next? And I think my generation, that tends to be our mode anyway, is we just, when things are going rough, we just kind of, grind down and go, okay, we're going to grind through this and get it done. And I think that's a big part of it as well.
So it's really interesting what you're saying about how you were approaching what you needed to do in those moments, because as you know, the name of my podcast is What's Your Next Move? And that is what you were using to direct all of your thought and energy, which really speaks to when you have that approach in a situation that, you were in a catastrophic situation on so many levels. And when you use the approach of constantly saying to yourself, what's my next move? What's my next move? What do I need to do in response to this? What's my next move? It's unbelievable how you move the dial and you keep things moving forward. One thing I'm curious about is, was there a moment that you remember during that long period, especially during the times where you were always coming in second for the interviews, that you felt a level of despair that was really overwhelming to you?
I would say there was one interview in particular. It was with a healthcare organization, and my parents wanted to have me committed because I was applying for a job that in a field that nearly killed me. But that I knew that I was the right candidate for it. I interviewed really well. I had great relationship with all of the people on the board that understood it. But they ended up going with somebody else. And I think that one really hurt because it was in a community that, I really liked. And it was one where I thought, okay, I can continue what I wanted to do. as far as being a pillar of the community, grow an organization and all that. I've learned my lesson to a certain extent at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I want another kick at this. I know I can do this differently. I don't know how yet, but I know I can. So that was heartbreaking, because I thought, okay, now we're looking at, what am I going to do? Am I going to have to, take, a job several levels down, making minimum wage? And again, I know there's a ton of people that do that, and I know they work their tails off, and I know what the challenges are and how they face them. But I was looking at it and going, okay, wait a minute, I've been at an executive level now. Yeah, I may have to take this. I wasn't looking down on the roles by any stretch. I was looking more of this won't be enough income to cover the bills that we have.
Right.
Including, the $1,000 a month and medications, because I didn't have insurance to cover it. So it was all out of pocket. And I pretty much made the decision that I need to take these medications, because if you don't, then the next heart attack is going to be a lot worse. And so I ended up taking them and spending all of that. And it was frustrating. But I knew, and it was very short though. It was, maybe a couple days. But then something, and this is going to sound warped, and it's in my book too. It was October 15th, actually. And the reason why I know this date is people will probably remember Balloon Boy. Remember the...
Yeah.
So we're all glued to the television like we were when AC was driving the white Bronco throughout California. And millennials, Google it. You'll figure out what it is. The whole nation was watching it. It was surreal. But I remember watching this thing, and the drama of it. Everybody's freaking out that there's this kid in this balloon floating around and all of that. And it turns out now the kid was upstairs somewhere, and it was just an empty balloon and all the other stuff and all that. But it was just the novelty of it and the absolute craziness of it. I wasn't laughing because we didn't know that there wasn't a kid in there. But afterwards, they're like, there was no kid in there. I'm just rolling, going, okay, the whole media, the whole world just got pumped. And I'm laughing, and I'm finding this funny and just giggling and all of that. And that was probably the first time in a long time where I just had a deep belly laugh and just laughing and all that. Yeah. And at that point, I'm going, okay, I need to stop the pity party for myself. Yeah. I need to man up, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to cover what we need to cover. Right. If that means that we can't live here and we got to downsize or do something else, we'll figure it out. Right. And from that point forward, it's still several months, looking for, because I didn't find the job until March. No, that was October. So November, December, January, February. And it was basically February when I finally decided, okay, I need to go up and look at Toronto and see. And of course the doors opened and things moved forward, and have been up here ever since. Wow. But that was a pinnacle moment. So, I look fondly upon Balloon Boy because the humor of it definitely helped.
Right, for sure. I remember that as well, and I think it was the father who had orchestrated the whole thing, and it was just a big scam that was going on. It was just such an unbelievable moment, but what a remarkable moment to look back on as the moment where you actually started to breathe again in the middle of all of this. And Michael, I did want to ask you one last question about this part of the journey, and that is obviously you had a partner at the time and had kids. Did your relationship survive what happened during that time?
It did for a period of time, but then over time, the relationship kind of went sideways, I guess is the best way to do it, and parted ways. It's if you would have asked me even back then if that was even a remote possibility, I would have never guessed it. But oftentimes in these types of situations, when you're having a significant emotional event where there's a significant life change, sometimes it gives you perspective and it gives you clarity. And when you have that clarity, you can look at situations and you can say, certain things aren't working. And
Right.
we went through counseling, and, we didn't just, abruptly go, but we went through counseling, and that, did not work out. I know in some cases it does for people, but
Right.
in others it didn't. And it's, for a lot of people, would say, people stay together for their kids and all of that. And I know a lot of people that have done that. But when I was going through my own counseling about it before, the separation, I had a female counselor. So I'm like, okay, let's see how, not to be, gender specific or anything like this, but I was concerned on how she was going to approach it and say, well, you should stay in and do this or that. But, she threw a curveball at me, and she said, your children deserve a happy dad. You're not happy now.
Yeah.
So that played a huge part into it. And, my kids are older now, and, it's, again, ideal world, if you could design a world and all that stuff, then, I wouldn't have designed it that way. But you know what? Sometimes we don't get to choose how things play out, but we do get to choose how to react to it and how to grow from it and how to learn from it. So I have, and as I indicated to you before, my life is really, really special. I'm very, very happy and thrilled that I have the life that I have, and the opportunities that I have, and the opportunities to talk with amazing people. And I've said it before, write books with PhDs. Come on, you told me that back, 9 years ago when I'm, watching Balloon Boy. I'm like, yeah, you're gonna write a book, and then you're gonna write another book with a PhD about changing corporate culture and leadership behavior and all of this stuff. And I'd be looking at going, it's like, I don't want to write a leadership book. You know how many leadership books are out there? Why would I bother doing that?
No kidding, right?
Well, you know what? If people don't take that opportunity to put out what they have, their stuff, and it robs the world of their stuff. And you think of all the great leaders and all the great people in human history, if they didn't take those steps and say, I'm going to do something, then we wouldn't have what we have today.
Right.
And so we owe it to society to get that book out and get everything else that we're doing with it out there, and really help organizations change how they behave and employees and all of that, because it'll make better organizations and organizations that will be sustainable and will last a long time and not go away.
Right. Absolutely. That's so beautiful, Michael. I want to ask you, because I just looked at the clock and I'm thinking, okay, how the hell did that hour just disappear that quickly? And it's usually that is the case on my show. And I wanted to ask you one last thing before we wrap up, and that is, after you've gone through something like this and you have a bit of time and distance from it, is there anything that you look back on that really stands out the most to you as a takeaway from all of this, where where you say, if I had to sum up that entire experience, this would be the thing that I've taken away from it that has guided my life as I've gone forward. Do you have an answer to that question?
I do, and it comes to me occasionally when I walk past a copy of my book, because I've got one on. It's sitting on top of my bookshelf in my bedroom, and I know this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but there are times, because of the work that I'm doing now and all this other stuff, that I'll simply forget that I wrote a book. And I'll look at it and go, holy shit, I wrote a book. It's published. You can order it online on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and Indigo and all these. And I wrote a book. There's only 1% of the population, or actually less than 1% of the population, has ever done that. And I'm like, whoa. So, and I look at that, and similar to the comment about the greatest amount of peace that I've ever felt, when the house was foreclosed. I'm thankful all of that happened, because one, it gave me a chance to really live life the best way I can, and also It's given me the clarity to look around and see all of these people that are burning out and stressed out and going, that's not a road you need to take.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way off of that road. I have a better way for you to take.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, designed to match how you live your life or how you want to live your life. Mm-hmm. It's not a cookie cutter approach per se. I mean, there's techniques and steps that people will follow, but it's like, what's important to you? What's the thing you want in your life? What are the things you want to accomplish? What's most important in your life? Okay, we got to do those things. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned a few minutes ago about how I got the opportunity to design my life on my terms. Mm-hmm. We all have that right. We all have that opportunity. We need to take it. We need to quit living in fear of losing our jobs. Guess what? People lose their jobs. I've lost many. Mm-hmm. It happens. You dust yourself off, you get another job. Mm-hmm. We have to get past that and be more bold. Hi, Steve. I always say that. We have to be bold, and we have to say, this is my life, mm-hmm. not to sound like Bon Jovi, but this is my life, and I'm going to design it the way that I want to live it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's my life. It's mine. I'm going to design it.
Right.
And I have. And I didn't before, now I have. And it's amazing. I'm enjoying the hell out of life, and it's fun and enjoyable, and I can do some great things, and mm-hmm. it's made a world of difference for me and the people that helping and mm-hmm. working with that are people in my life. I'm creating a positive impact on them, which just makes me grin from ear to ear.
Yeah, no kidding. Isn't that the truth? And so as we wrap this up, Michael, and the name of my podcast being What's Your Next Move, let me ask you, where you are right now and what's going on in your life, what's your next move?
My next move is to be working side by side with you and helping organizations really mm-hmm. Make themselves better for their employees and their organizations, continue to working with people on their boundaries and helping them design the life that they truly deserve to live, and mm-hmm. just, making my dent in the universe and, doing the things that I'm enjoying to do because I'm serving people, and I'm serving people from a full glass. Mm-hmm. And that means they are getting the best version of me. And mm-hmm. If I had any regrets, the people that I've served in my past, they didn't get the full version of me. And I wish they did, but they didn't. So now the people in my life are. And mm-hmm. I'm thankful for that opportunity.
Oh my gosh. And I am so fortunate to have entered your orbit in the moment that I did, because the time that we've had together, working together, has been so productive and gratifying and rewarding. And I'm really looking forward to a long and prosperous future with you, Michael. So thank you so
Likewise.
Very much for being with me today. It's just been a marvelous interview, and I've loved the story. This is the first time I've heard your story, so I've been listening in the same way that our listeners will be. So you know what, this is what I always think at the end of the interviews is I have about 1,000 more questions that I want to ask you, and obviously we're out of time, but this has just been really delicious. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Arlene, thank you so much. I appreciate you and all the stuff that you do.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Well, there you have it, everybody. Another episode of What's Your Next Move. And as is always the case, as I end each episode, I ask you to think about where you're at in your life right now and ask yourself the question, what's your next move? I'm Arlene Battisil. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move?